Well, President Trump is sticking it to China. We are working through tariffs, and suddenly somebody connected to Jeffrey Epstein, the Clintons, and the royal family decides to off herself. I want to go through this and other big stories with my special guest, Peter Schweizer. Peter, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hey, great to be back with you, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let me give my audience some background. Peter is an investigative journalist with decades of experience researching and exposing political issues, economic issues, corruption. He's written Blood Money, Controligarchs, Red Handed, Profile of Corruption, Secret Empires, Clinton Cash, Extortion, and many, many other things. Let me jump right in because this is something that's bugging me. I know that it's been bugging my audience. What was your first reaction when you learned that Virginia Giuffre, the most powerful witness left against Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, she's connected to the Clintons and Prince Andrew of the royal family, out of nowhere, she suddenly decides to unalive herself? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought is what a tragedy. I mean, this is somebody who was suffering and was victimized by very powerful people. She certainly had a lot of information that would be valuable to those people. They would want to keep it quiet. I'm sure they're investigating it. I don't know what the indications are, whether it was in fact suicide or whether it was something else afoot. But I think it goes to the root of the problem, in which the way that they've handled or not handled the entire Epstein episode, which is transparency, transparency, transparency. And I'm not quite sure why the current Attorney General Pam Bondi has not been more aggressive on this. You had this demonstration earlier in her tenure where she claimed to be releasing all these important records. Those were records that were basically already out there. What really needs to be done, I think, is we need to bring forward a couple of things. Number one, any internal documents that were obtained when they raided Epstein's island and Epstein's office. The second thing is there seems to be in existence videotapes involving, let's say, prominent people engaged in activities supposedly with underage minors. All of that should be released in a way, of course, that protects any of the victims here. But that needs to be released. And as long as you don't have that kind of transparency, you can have all this frustration and anger that we don't know more about this episode. And let's be very clear. If Epstein was catering to, homeless people that had no power and no influence, we would know a lot more about this case than we do. The fact that he had the clients that he had is really, in my mind, the only reason why we haven't had more transparency here. And the passing of Virginia Giuffre is just another tragedy in the many that Epstein has caused with his horrible conduct.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. President Trump was asked about this flying back from the Pope's funeral, and he said, we're going to get it all out. This stuff takes time. So on the one hand, I wish Pam Bondi hadn't started off by saying, we'll get this out day one. On the other hand, I do believe it's coming out. The president made a comment on it. He said that Virginia Giuffre's death was a tragedy and a mystery, and he's waiting to hear more about that. Let's jump into some names that I know that you have done deep dive on, as well as Seamus Bruner. But Trump and his team, in my estimation, they've cut to the bone on USAID, the WHO, World Economic Forum, Paris Climate Accord, just to name a few. How does this undermine people like Bill Gates and George Soros, of which many believe they should be investigated and possibly arrested? But these two specifically pretend as if they are helping humanity when in fact they've just been leveraging American tax dollars to harm and control humanity. Your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when we talk about corporate welfare, we usually have in mind large American corporations, but it also applies to billionaires. And the notion that USAID and these other government agencies should be working with these individuals in a way that advances their personal agendas I think is absolutely absurd. In the research that I did on the Clintons, for example, and the Clinton Foundation, it was very clear that they leveraged USAID money to advance their own personal financial interests. And you referenced my colleague, Seamus Bruner. He's done a lot of research on this. And to the extent to which entities like the Bill Gates Foundation are affiliated with and work in conjunction with for-profit businesses that Bill Gates has set up. He'll invest in some kind of technology, and then he has USAID money or he uses his own philanthropic money to advance the commercial interests of companies that he has invested in. Shows how ridiculous this behavior is. So my hope is that this is, number one, going to alert to everybody what's going on. Some of us have been tracking this for a while, but it really, I think, makes it very clear sort of what the business model is. And I think it's very important for that to happen. And the second thing is there needs to be investigations about the flow of this USAID money. As I point out all the time, the problem when you have a nonprofit or an NGO, people think, well, it's nonprofit and the guy that's running it makes a little bit of money, but nobody else is making money. You can structure these nonprofits in a way that they're essentially functioning as money laundering entities. If I set up a nonprofit foundation and I get $1 billion from USAID, I'm not going to pay myself a big salary. That's too obvious. But what I'll do is I'll set up a bunch of LLCs, one to handle media, one to handle fundraising, one to handle management. Those will be companies I own, and I will have the nonprofit pay those entities to perform those functions. And that goes on all the time with NGOs. So you can find ways to actually make money off of NGOs in a manner that's impossible to detect, because here's the thing. You don't have to show who owns those companies that the NGOs are contracting to, and you don't even have to show the details of what the money's being spent on. So a lot of times it's money laundering, and we need more investigation involving whoever is connected to these NGOs.
I completely agree. The first thing you said was exposing the playbook. I think Elon Musk going on Joe Rogan and saying, listen, here's exactly how George Soros pretends to be for humanity. But then he sets up something with about $1 million of his own money and then leverages that through his relationship with Democrats and Republicans in order to get $1 billion. He then, like you said, sets up all these other things to bring in more money or to undermine. And then, Elon Musk puts a clip of that on X, and it gets 80 million views. That particular interview got about 20 million views. Is this part of exposing it? Number one. And then number two, who are we waiting for to start digging in NGO by NGO to expose names and dollar amounts and the money trail?
Great questions. Yeah, I think that the way that Elon Musk has gone about it with Doge is exactly the way that you need to expose this. And I think the fact that he focuses on the level of detail is so important. And yeah, George Soros, I mean, he has a history. There are lots of detailed allegations in Central America, in Asia, in Africa, where George Soros and his charities, so to speak, go in and perform certain functions, but he has got, for example, a stake in a mining company that has something before the government in those nations. So he uses his charity and the USAID money that comes along with it in a manner that could potentially benefit the private investments that he actually runs. So it needs to be investigated. Here's the challenge, Stephen. We spent a lot of time investigating this very thing. The problem is we can only take it so far because we don't have subpoena power. So what you need is people that have subpoena power. Those could be a couple of congressional committees, the House Oversight Committee with Congressman Comer. I've done some work with him. He did some very good work, I think, as it relates to the Bidens. He was able to uncover things we weren't able to do because he can go to a bank or he can go to a company and say, we are demanding by court order that you turn these records over. So it either needs to be congressional committees like House Oversight, or it needs to be the Department of Justice itself, because they're the only ones that can force banks and force these, LLCs or companies that they set up to funnel the nonprofit money through. They're the only ones that can force them by writ of law to turn over those records. That's the only way you're going to get a hold of them. They're not going to give them up voluntarily.
Okay. Let's use one name, for example, Bill Gates. In my limited research, I realized he's given the media companies hundreds of millions of dollars in donations. And in exchange, they don't bring up the stuff that he's doing around the world. Does he have that kind of leverage within governments around the world so that nobody's investigating him or digging into his foundation or seeing how he's leveraging USAID and other organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the relationship with the media is a very important one, and the fact that you are giving donations or have relationships with media outlets is absolutely going to deter them from investigating him. In my book, Red Handed, which came out a couple of years ago, #1 New York Times bestseller, I exposed Bill Gates' very, very cozy relationship with the Chinese Communist Party in terms of his business investments in China, in terms of what he did at Microsoft and other companies, and the fact that he praises the Chinese government and the CCP for their leadership and the way that they govern the country. That means that whatever he does in China, he's in the good graces with the CCP. They're not going to investigate him. They're not going to expose him. Again, my view is always the mistake and the terrible things that were done to Donald Trump in terms of the use of the law. It had all the examples of sort of a dirty cop, which is, I found the guy, now I'm going to find the crime. In other words, they said, we're going to find something to pin on him. So I don't think anybody is saying we know exactly what Bill Gates did that violated these laws. But the point is that there's a lot of suspicious behavior, a lot of things that deserve investigation. Now, maybe at the end of the day, everybody looks at it and says, there's no apparent crime here. That's fine. But the point is, it has not been looked at. And that's what needs to be done. And I think the point you're making is a good one. There are plenty of powerful people in the media, in government, with NGOs that are funded by his foundation, foreign governments like people in the CCP, who essentially cover for him and make sure that Bill Gates does not get the scrutiny that he deserves.
Yeah. Well, when a lot of the media's money comes from Big Pharma, they never badmouth Big Pharma. When money comes
Exactly
from
right.
Bill Gates and George Soros, suddenly they never, I remember a Fox News one time, they brought up George Soros and literally somebody else popped up on the screen and was like, we're not talking about him. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, where'd
And
that other human being come from? It was very weird.
Well, and Stephen, this is what Soros has been so manipulative at doing, is they essentially have said on the left, and of course there's irony given what's going on in college campuses today, but they essentially set up this mode of thinking that if you attacked Soros, it was really because you were anti-Semitic. You were going after Jews, which was absurd because George Soros is not a practicing Jew and does not have any particular affinity for Israel. But B, it's ridiculous to say you cannot criticize somebody because of sort of some made up or manipulative explanation. So they've been very masterful at trying to cover for George Soros by attacking the messenger, attacking the person that is exposing what he is doing. I think those days are done, and I think we're going to see more of it. And I think we should see more of it of his son as well, who's really taking over the reins at the Soros shop. I think Alex Soros is far more political even than his father was, and we can expect even greater activism as far as the Soros Foundation than we've seen in the past.
Yeah. Well, he's about to marry Hillary Clinton's best friend and former personal assistant. So I'm sure we'll see more of him meddling in US politics. But isn't it the Democrats that scream, we can't have billionaires like Elon Musk interfering in US politics?
Yeah.
But then they ignore Bill Gates, George Soros, and many others. The US dollar is under siege, and Biden's policies have caused irreparable damage, slashing its buying power by up to 30%. Inflation is down, but everything is still expensive. Meanwhile, President Trump is fighting to restore America's economic strength and protect the petrodollar. History tells us the dollar's value has plummeted while gold and silver have soared. If you're betting on the future, 10 or 20 years from now, gold and silver are the clear winner. Don't let your wealth be eroded. Colonial Metals Group's experts can help guide you, whether you're starting fresh or managing an existing IRA or your family's fortune. Now, their professionalism can help you understand why gold and silver are so powerful. I want you to act now by giving them a call at 800-807-2143 for a special offer. Get a free safe and up to $7,500 in free silver. But best of all, I want you to get peace of mind. Go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/Stephen-Gardner or snap the QR code in the bottom left-hand corner. You guys, I believe in gold and silver. You should have some in your portfolio. You've done extensive writing on the Biden crime family. You brought up Representative James Comer. I had the congressman on my show. He said, my gosh, there's so much that we just ran out of time. And we had so many people blocking us at the White House, at banks, trying to get this. Do you think with the Trump administration, I know they have a long laundry list of to-dos. Do you think one of those to-dos is to continue to expose the corruption of the Biden family?
Well, I sure hope so. I know one of the things that Jim Comer has done, and I think it was a great idea, is he sent a very detailed letter to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, saying, look, we believe these are the very specific things that warrant possible criminal indictment by the Department of Justice. And he laid them out. Some of them were as basic as lying to Congress. You had members of the Biden family who were under oath before Congress, giving a subpoena, and they just flat out lied. Some of them are like that. Some of them relate to money laundering and more serious crimes. And Comer's point is, I think, exactly the right one. We're Congress. My committee can investigate. We have subpoena power, but we can't indict anybody. And our ability to subpoena people, we don't have the muscle that the Department of Justice does. So his challenge to Pam Bondi was DOJ needs to be doing this, and I hope they do. And here's the thing, Stephen. Some people will say, Joe Biden's not in office anymore. You know, he's an old guy. He doesn't really even know what's going on. We should just sort of let this pass. It's really not about Joe Biden and his family. It's about a much larger issue. And the issue is, are we going to allow people in Washington, D.C. to set their families up to receive large payouts from foreign governments, from adversarial governments like China and Russia, or from corrupt oligarchs in Ukraine, do nothing in return for it, while you as a politician are guiding our affairs of state involving those countries? I think the vast majority of people would raise their hand and say that's outrageous. It shouldn't happen. Here's the thing. If we do not see some kind of indictment, some kind of detailed investigation by the Department of Justice on these issues as related by the Bidens, we know in Washington, D.C. that what they did will be imitated. In fact, it's already being imitated. So the only way you deter this from happening in the future involving other politicians is you make sure that people pay a price for it. You know, you go through the DOJ investigation, you see what's there, you get experienced prosecutors to look at it. And if the evidence is there, I think it's there, you charge people. If you don't do that, do not be surprised that sometime in the future, we don't have a vice president or a president who does the exact same thing, taking money from the Chinese or for other entities, tens of millions of dollars, while they as president are steering the ship of state. I mean, it's outrageous that it happened, and it's going to happen again unless we get a reckoning on this.
I completely agree with you. I actually, this is a theory that I've been thinking through. I actually believe, especially with the 70 plus million that voted for Trump, there is an appetite to see justice of the Biden crime family, just like there's an appetite to see justice with Dr. Anthony Fauci. What I think the American people are losing steam on is the anticipation that something will happen. But if it actually happens, boom, I think there's going to be headlines I think there's going to be a lot of interest. And so my hope is that they are going to continue to pursue that. Let me run a clip here really quickly. They are announcing. Well, let me run the clip and then we'll talk about it together.
Today we kick off 100-day week with a focus on the president's historic effort to secure our southern border. Later this afternoon, President Trump will sign an executive order on law and order and another executive order on sanctuary cities. The first EO will strengthen and unleash America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent citizens. The second EO is centered around protecting American communities from criminal aliens, and it will direct the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to publish a list of state and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws. After these are signed, the president will have signed more than 140 executive orders already, rapidly approaching the total number signed by the Biden administration over the course of 4 years in office.
It seems to me that cutting off the money supply is like cutting off oxygen to corruption. What are your thoughts on, as we approach the 100-day mark of President Trump's second term, that he's now saying we're going after the sanctuary cities? No more hiding these people in jails. No more hiding them in strip clubs. No more giving money to you guys to continue to undermine America. Your thoughts on that, Peter?
Yeah, no, I think it's a necessary step. I mean, look, these sanctuary cities or sanctuary states have put themselves in the crosshairs because they have decided, as a local elected official, as a mayor of a city, that they somehow are going to determine America's immigration laws. Nobody elected them to do that. Even the constituents in their city didn't elect them to do that. And if they're not going to conform to what the federal government has asked them to do, what is lawful for them to ask them to do, there needs to be a consequence for it. And I think, the situation you have with that judge in Wisconsin is, to me, a classic example of the overreach and the overstep of these local officials. I mean, here you had a local judge who was given, according to reports, was given a subpoena by immigration officials from a judge saying, we are going to take possession of this gentleman. He is going to be kicked out of the country. And she essentially helped that guy escape out the back door. You now have a judge who is defying a subpoena, a judge that is supposed to be what? An officer of the court. And she has decided that somehow, in her great wisdom and knowledge, she is, going to take this upon herself. That's the kind of mindset that I think you see with a lot of elected officials. And here's the thing we have to keep in mind, Stephen, is this is not just ideological or philosophical. There are deep financial reasons why these cities and why these states want to be sanctuary cities. One is, when block grants are determined at a state or local level, it's determined by the population of that area, not the population of citizens, the population of anyone. So the Census Bureau does its estimates, and that's where federal block grants are handed out accordingly. The second thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to determining which states have how many members of Congress, for the Electoral College and elected members, the census does that every 10 years. Again, that's not based on citizens. It's based on anybody that is in the state. And I have seen estimates that the state of California, simply because of the legal immigration population in California, has 4 to 6 more members of Congress than they ordinarily would. So the point is, this is about political power. They want migrants there because it means federal dollars. They want migrants there because while California is losing its population in terms of citizens fleeing the state, the only way that they can maintain their congressional representation is by making sure that illegals are in their jurisdictions, and that needs to stop. So I think this is a welcome step. The federal government has always put requirements on state governments and local governments when they get federal grants, and saying that you need to comply with federal immigration law certainly seems reasonable to me.
Yeah. On the other hand, I look at like Chicago, for example. You got Brandon Johnson. Guy has like an 11% approval rating, mostly put into office by Black Americans, foundational Black Americans that have been here for generations. And then what does he do? He takes their money and gives it to people that have been in the country for 5 months versus, 200 years. I see there's going to be a reckoning that way. But you bring up a really great point. Like, imagine if those 5 or 6 seats were actually Republican seats in California, but because of the census and just sneaking as many illegals in, it really does. Like right now, we have such a slim majority in the House of Representatives, and yet you look at the electoral map, you would think America is a very conservative country, but not because of these big cities where they just keep stuffing people. And Elon Musk, as I said at the top of the hour, he's been trying to expose this. Biden was flying hundreds of thousands of people in to try to specifically offset the swing states so that they would never swing towards a Republican ever again. Do you think, I know right now, one of the criticisms of the Trump administration isn't that they're not doing a good job, it's that they're not doing it fast enough. Are we going to be able to do it fast enough before the next census or before the 2026 midterm elections?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephen. And look, I understand people's impatience. The challenge is that when it comes to the issue of immigration, you have the 4 years of Biden to deal with, but frankly, you have 20 or 30 or 40 years of general U.S. approach, with the exception of Trump's first term, which has generally been pretty lackadaisical when it comes to illegal migrants coming into the United States. So undoing it over the course of the first 100 days, the first 300 days, I don't think is realistic. I think the question is priority and momentum. And I think it is a priority for this administration. I also think the momentum is there. A lot of it is getting tangled up in the courts. I think that Congress is looking at taking some action there because you have, in a lot of cases, federal judges that are issuing national moratoriums on decisions, which seems to be an overreach in a lot of areas. So I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court is going to reinforce Trump's right and ability to do this. I think the national consensus in the country has moved further and further towards Trump rather than away from him. So I'm optimistic, and I just think we need to be patient. Given the array of powerful forces that are against what he's trying to do, I think they've made very, very good progress here in the first 100 days.
Yeah, I agree. You're not going to undo decades of bad behavior in 100 days. But what I want my audience to just be aware of is the media, they're going to try to spin this against Trump. Look at what he couldn't do in 100 days instead of all that he actually has done. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent pointed this out pretty harshly on MSNBC when they said, oh, President Trump is killing people's 401k. He's like, well, yeah, it went down, but then it had one of its biggest days back, and then you guys never covered that because it doesn't fit your agenda of trying to humiliate President Trump as he negotiates these tariffs. I just think, it's so easy to believe the media, but they lie so easily. That's why I'm hoping, like my podcast, the work that you're doing gives people the education to remain patient while they continue to do so much good for the American people.
Yeah, I think that the major media has done a really bad job, not only of failing to report the news, but in damaging their own brands. That they really, I think, in Trump's first term and now in the second term, have adopted a posture that they are the resistance. They are not news outlets that are supposed to provide people with information as to what is actually going on. And look, I understand criticize. It's not a question of criticizing Trump or raising questions, but it's actually providing an accurate accounting of what is going on. It's the reason the mainstream media, in a recent poll I saw, actually has a worse approval rating than Congress. Congress is like 19%. The media is below that. They have done that to themselves. They will say, well, people are trashing us all the time and Trump calls us fake news. That's not what's damaging the brand. They did the damage to themselves because they have chosen that the quote unquote resistance is more important to them than actually doing a professional job. I'm one that happens to believe that we need media outlets that people look at as at least somewhat objective. Nobody's going to be perfectly objective. We need those brands that we maybe had 50 or 60 years ago that, yeah, they tilted maybe a liberal a little bit, but they tried to cover both sides. We need that. We do not have it from any of the large brand name media outlets anymore. And they're not going to be able to reclaim that mantle. Their damage to the brand is just too great. And again, they did it to themselves. They have nobody else to blame.
Yeah, I agree. I could agree. Okay. You have done so much research on China. I want to switch gears with you. President Trump seems to see China as stealing our patents, our intellectual property. Corporate America drained all these jobs over to them, but then allowed them to sell back into America. So hurting jobs, making cheap stuff, bringing it back over here. Now they're openly trying to take over areas where America used to be strong. They're trying to overthrow or at least undermine the US dollar. Tell me your thoughts on this economic war we're in with China and how Trump's tariffs may help or hurt the United States.
Yeah, as I wrote about in my book, Blood Money, China has a strategy that they call disintegration warfare. That's their term, not mine. There was a famous book in China published in 2012. It was endorsed by all the top military officers. President Xi has read it and embraced it. And what disintegration warfare basically says is we are going to engage in activities that undermine the United States, even kill Americans, but we're going to do it short of a kinetic fighting war. We don't want that. That is essentially what disintegration warfare is. So that's, for example, what fentanyl involves. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for people under the age of 45. A lot of people don't realize that the vast majority of people that die of fentanyl poisoning don't even know they're taking fentanyl. They think they're taking a Vicodin or an Adderall. It's some college kid who, is taking Adderall because he's studying for an exam. It's something that was bought off the street. He takes it. It's got a fentanyl in it, and he dies of an overdose. It's the leading cause of death for people under the age of 45 in America today. And when you look at how fentanyl got to the United States, it is a Chinese operation. The Mexican drug cartels are the junior partners. The Chinese control the precursors. There's 2,000 Chinese chemists in northern Mexico that create this deadly cocktail for the cartels. All the money laundering that the Sinaloa cartel does and the other drug cartels do, it's all done through Chinese state-owned banks. So this is Chinese warfare against the United States, in addition to the economic war that you so rightly mentioned that they are engaged in. This is disintegration warfare. And I think what you see with Trump, Trump is familiar with my book. I briefed several of his top advisors on its contents. What Trump is doing is giving a major pushback to China on all fronts. So the trade issue and the tariffs and the economic dislocation you talked about, absolutely, that's very clear what he's doing. But then look at what he's doing with Mexico and Canada with the so-called fentanyl tariff. He's saying, look, you guys are the staging ground for the Chinese efforts to poison Americans until you actually do something about it, which, by the way, you should have done in the first place. You're going to be paying this massive tariff on us. You're going to be paying a price for the actions that you're doing. I think even if you look at the attempt to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, whatever one thinks that deal should look like, I think a major motivation for Trump is he wants to further isolate China. And Russia, because it's been isolated because of its aggression in Ukraine, has been pushed close to China. It's led to greater economic cooperation. There's a lot of natural resources in Russia that China needs. What Trump is trying to do is broker a deal to pull Russia away from China back to a closer relationship with the West. So what you're seeing with Donald Trump, in my mind, is a grand strategy to push back on China on every single front. And I think it's long overdue. And you're quite right to call out the people who are concerned about, the drop in the NASDAQ over a 7 to 10 day period. It's absurd. I mean, when you're trying to deal with major difficult issues, there are going to be some disruptions, but it's going to make us stronger. It's going to make our stock market stronger down the road. So I think it needs to continue to be full speed ahead to the point where China is essentially forced to buckle on some of the things they're doing vis-a-vis the United States.
Okay. That's interesting the way that you worded that about Russia and China. I had Colonel John Mills on maybe 7 to 10 days ago, and he used a different phrase. He said it may look like Trump is being friendly or kind to Putin. What you don't realize is he's actually trying to peel them away from China, because China is the real enemy. China is the one hurting America more than any other. They steal our stuff. Right now, I was just reading over the weekend how we've been making all these advancements in microchips, AI, crypto, and they just come in and steal it in the dark of night. And so everything good that we do, they just counterfeit it and copy it and put it back out to the world. But until somebody pointed out what they're trying to do with getting Russia away from China, that relationship didn't make sense. But now, boom, it's like the light bulb went on for me, and I appreciate that. Do you think, as they try to end the Russia-Ukraine war, will one of the tactics be to make Russia a friend and trade with them to strengthen that relationship and further peel them away? Or is there a loyalty to Ukraine that now we have to stiff arm Russia for their behavior?
My view is that, look, Russia does a lot of things against the United States as well. But when you look at the Ukraine-Russia war, Ukraine is simply not in a position to win. And I think Zelensky knows that. And so the question is, what does a post-war Ukraine look like? And those details are going to be worked out. I believe if Putin actually does sign a treaty with Ukraine and honor it, and I will say that's a big if, right? Because he does not have a great record when it comes to abiding by things he's going to say he does. But let's say that Trump gets him to do that. I think it absolutely makes sense to bring Russia back within the family of nations in terms of trade, in terms of, their energy exports, et cetera. Again, recognizing what are they doing vis-a-vis Iran? Are they doing other things to undermine the United States? But I think Putin is in a very difficult situation. His economy is not good. The Chinese don't particularly help him all that much. He needs access to Western markets. So if he actually abides by an agreement and indicates that he will and actually does, I think we should actually see trade negotiations flow open. And I would reiterate exactly what your previous guest said. Russia is right now a declining power demographically, in terms of its economy, in terms of its global influence. China is the ascendant power, and their stated goal is to surpass and supplant the United States. And given the current trajectory, they're in a position to do that. Time is essentially working in their favor as long as we allow the theft to continue and this continued relationship where they can exploit us to continue. So that is absolutely where we need to be concentrating our energies. And if we can essentially get Russia to help us, remember, that's what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan, the great anti-communist, my favorite president of the 20th century, Reagan went to China, the People's Republic of China, and actually sold the Chinese arms. Why? Because they were anti-Soviet at the time. So Reagan understood the enemy of my enemy can be my friend. And I think that's the way that we need to approach Russia, assuming that they are willing to realign with us.
Yeah, interesting. Just given enough time, enemies change, friendships change. I know I just read that there's going to be a ceasefire so that Russia can have a couple of days to celebrate losing 25 million people in their military journey to snuff out Adolf Hitler. And so, there has been collaboration in the past. It'll be really interesting to see that there was this iconic picture of Trump and Zelensky at I think the Vatican, or at least, the Pope's funeral. And that's one of those iconic pictures of trying to bring a war to an end. So hopefully they will. In our final minutes together, Peter, tell me about the book that you had come out, Blood Money.
Yeah, Blood Money is the subtitle is why the powerful remain silent while China kills Americans. And the reason is because they all have financial incentives to basically look the other way at what China is doing towards the United States. So there's a chapter in the book about what we were talking about earlier, their involvement in every stage of fentanyl. Fentanyl poisoning is really a form of chemical warfare that China is engaged in against the United States. It's a reversal of the opium wars of the 19th century, which they believe really set them back globally. So they're trying to replicate that with the United States. But we also look at other things as well. We look at what China's role was in COVID. A lot of people know the issue of the lab leak and the origins of the virus. But what I point out is China knew very early on in the crisis that this was transferable from human to human. This was actually something that was viral, that could go from person to person. They withheld that from us for more than 90 days. And what did they do during that 90 days? They massively cut their exports of PPE supplies to the West, and they massively increased their importation of it. So by the time they said to us, oh, by the way, this can transfer from person to person, they had cornered the market on PPE supplies. And I'm not talking about the silly masks that people are wearing, the cloth mask. I'm talking about the K95 masks. There was a series of other things they did during COVID that was literally designed to maximize the body count in the United States. And there's also a section in the book, there are many others, a section in the book about their political interference in the United States. Chinese-backed groups were really the tip of the spear when it came to the BLM protests in 2020. They are also the tip of the spear in a lot of the pro-Hamas protests that we're seeing now. A lot of people assume that it's Palestinian-led. It's actually led by a couple of groups, one called PSL, one called FRSO, which are financially and ideologically linked to China. So China is very much engaged in trying to manipulate the political climate in the United States to sow divisiveness and chaos and advance their interests. And very few people want to talk about it in Washington because they're conflicted.
Okay. Wow. This has been scary and insightful at the same time. I mean, we all know that there's somebody behind these organized things, but then when you follow the money back and you realize, wait a minute, this is a ideological warfare against us. This is virus warfare. This is chemical warfare. I can see why Steve Bannon, yourself, others say China is the greatest threat to America. Peter, thank you so much for all the research you do, digging in there, putting your name and reputation on the line. I personally really appreciate it. It's why I wanted to have you on. If people want to follow you online, where can I point them towards?
Yeah, Stephen. Well, thanks for having me on your show. I always look forward to doing it, and you're performing a great service. So thank you. Keep it up and keep the faith. You can follow me on Twitter, X at Peter Schweizer, and you can also go to thedrilldown.com. That is the website. It updates on some of the research that we're doing, and thedrilldown.com is also a place where you can subscribe to my podcast, which is called The Drill Down.
Okay, great. I'll put those direct links as well as links to all of your incredible, deeply researched books. Peter, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too, Steve.